it's just a fundamental issue. If you can't have a sensible, principled position on net zero, then what are you doing? This isn't some niche issue. This isn't some issue of conscience where each individual is going to come to their own position. This is just common sense politics. Either you back suicidally stupid, self-harming, massive emission cuts that are going to further devastate manufacturing in this country, that are going to send household bills through the roof. You look at the sort of energy poverty, there's a name for it, that they're experiencing in the UK. And if you want to visit that upon Australian households, then shame on you, and shame on the coalition that they still are wandering and having meetings and group hugs about this. Find your backbone, find some principles, and bloody give the Australian people a choice, because when the Australian people have been given a choice on this issue, every time they have picked affordability and reliability over emission cuts. Remember the unlosable election? Remember the climate change election? We were told it was going to be about climate change. And somehow Scott Morrison won the unwinnable election by giving us a choice. And then he went and embraced net zero, and we saw what happened to his prime ministership and what happened to Peter Dutton, who, after having that enormous triumph with The Voice, decided to go Labor light, went into the last election with barely a conservative policy. So I don't know how often it needs to happen at the federal level, at the state level, where the Liberal Party leans to the left or the centre, as they like to think it is, and gets smashed. And they seem to think the solution for that is to lean further left, as opposed to finding their true conservative heart. And if you can't find that, move aside. We've got a two-party system. Let someone else who can actually... This is why I think a divorce between the Nationals and the Libs isn't a terrible thing. It happened for all of 5 minutes post-election, and then they kissed and made up. But I think it would actually help weed out some of the bedwetters and actually have a strong, principled party reborn that knows who they are and what they stand for.
And more importantly, Rita, you expose the bedwetters, because you mentioned when Scott Morrison embraced net zero, the argument, and the only argument at the time, was that it was a financial question, that both Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg were adamant that the only reason the Liberals were doing a backflip was because the rest of the world, the financial industries, the big scary financiers around the world, had told them that nobody would invest in Australia unless we adopted net zero. That argument, you never hear that argument. It's never mentioned now. Now it's all about, Conservatives want to conserve the natural environment, which is a stupid argument, as I said, one for morons only, and I'll explain why later. But you never hear, where are all the financiers, James? What happened to them? The ones who wouldn't invest in Australia unless we adopted net zero. You don't hear a word about that anymore.
Well, it's interesting, just on the question of the financiers, because the problem is not that we don't have money that wants to invest in Australia. There's plenty of money out there that wants to invest in Australia. The problem is it's so hard to invest in Australia. It is so hard. All of the big miners are saying, and all the big extractive firms are saying, that it is too hard. The green tape, the red tape, the black tape makes it basically impossible to get a project started. You can't be looking at pumping billions of dollars into a project for billions of dollars of return if it's going to be tied up for 20 years in environmental impact statements, all of that. But just on the net zero thing and the Morrison administration, there was another reason why. And it's a tricky one, but one of the reasons why I think they did go for net zero was because it was a sweetener to the Biden administration to get AUKUS over the line.
Well, you asked the whole question about what about the financiers and claims that they're not going to invest in a country that doesn't embrace net zero. They seem to be doing pretty well investing in America, because Trump has created a pro-business, pro-investment environment and abandoned net zero, walked away from the Paris Agreement, and they don't seem to have any issues. So perhaps, again, we were sold another lie. And I don't think you had to dig too deeply to see what an absolute lie that was.